involved in running. Been involved in running for a long time, through obstacle races. I've done marathons. I've also done quite a few ultra marathons as well, including some Ultra X races with Sam. So yeah, it's a nice link to all be working together again. But what I'm going to be talking about today is basically how to train for your first ultra, because like David said, it can feel quite scary, but it doesn't have to be. And there's things that you can do to prepare yourself, that if you are thinking of taking on an ultra, it doesn't have to be something really scary. You don't have to sign up for the biggest, hardest race that you can find. And I think Sam's going to cover that later, kind of how to select your race. So I'm going to share my screen because I've just got a few slides where I'm just going to talk a little bit about what to think about if you're training for your first ultra. So hopefully this will work if technology doesn't fail us. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see that. Hopefully, yeah, brilliant. So how to train for your first ultra. And like that should be moving. So yeah, the basics. The most important thing I'd say is give yourself enough time to prepare. Depending on kind of where you're at in your running journey, and okay, sorry guys, my daughter is also with us as well. She hasn't run an ultra, but she's only 3, so she might run one in the future. But yeah, you listening? Yeah, you're gonna run your first ultra one day. So giving yourself enough time to prepare. So obviously you're running an ultra, and an ultra can be anything from around 50k up to some super crazy races that are hundreds and hundreds of miles, or multi-day, Gracie, or multi-day ultras. Darling, I'm really sorry about this, guys, but giving yourself enough time to prepare. So say if you're coming into it as someone that's fairly new to running, you don't want to be thinking, oh, I'm gonna do an ultra next month. You want to give yourself at least 6 months, 6 to 12 months ideally, to really build up your distances, how comfortable you are with running, maybe get some other races under your belt as well. And more so just so you want to get your body used to that mileage, because it is quite tough going out and running multiple times a week. You're obviously going to be running longer runs as well. You want to give yourself enough time to actually build yourself up and also enjoy it as well. Because if you go from 0 to 100 in a really short space of time, it's just not as fun. So I definitely say, if you're thinking now, like at this moment in time, that, yeah, I quite fancy doing an ultra, I would perhaps look for one towards the end of the year, or maybe even next year, to really give yourself plenty of time to build up. Doing your research as well. And I think Sam, like I said, Sam's going to cover this as well, but it's very easy, I think, sometimes to get caught up on social media and see people doing all these amazing races, but you forget sometimes that these people might have had years of experience in running. So the races that they're doing, whilst they look incredible, they've probably got years and years of experience building up to that. So do your research for the type of race that you want to do. First of all, I'd decide what distance you want to do. So do you want to start with a 50k or 100k? And I think the good thing about there being so many ultra races now is that there are a lot more accessible races. So Race to the Stones, for example, they have the option to do either 50k on one day, 50k the next day. You can do the 100k all in one go. You can do it over 2 days. So there's lots and lots of different options now. So you don't have to just do the first ultra that you find. If you are new to ultras as well, or looking for your first race, races like Threshold or Ultra X that are well supported with aid stations, lots of crew, lots of volunteers as well, are a really good way to get started, because there are some pretty horrible ultra races out there where you pretty much get plonked in the middle of nowhere, get given a tracker, and then you don't see anyone until you cross the finish line. But if you are looking for those races that have got kind of like a more community feel and where you're going to get supported throughout, there are lots more available. So yeah, definitely, like if you're thinking about doing one, doing your research is really important, because you also don't want to end up with any nasty surprises on the day as well. So know what you're signing up for, so then you can plan for that as well, which leads quite nicely onto the final point. And obviously I'm speaking as a coach that works for a coaching app. I'm not saying to you all that you need to download Coopah and follow a plan, but I would highly, highly recommend following a training plan. And whether that is an app like Coopah or you get a coach. I know that UltraX, for example, have training plans on their website. A lot of other races do as well. But following a training plan can make sure that you build up sensibly, because it can be quite hard to know what to do for an ultra. Even if you've trained for a marathon before, it is different. Obviously, you are going to have to do longer runs. You need to get used to running kind of back-to-back longer runs as well. So again, following a training plan helps you like have that structure, not doing too much too soon or too much too quickly. And then also on the other side, not doing enough, because again, you don't want to go into an ultra race and not have trained enough and kind of get to the halfway point and think, oh my God, what have I done? This is awful. So I would highly recommend following a training plan. And again, similar to when you're selecting a race, do your research. If you're someone that needs a little bit more support, then something like a coaching app or perhaps a one-to-one coach might be better for you. Or if you're a bit of a lone ranger and can kind of just happily get on with it, then following like a PDF plan might work for you as well. But again, do your research and find what works for you. And I think that's a really important thing to think about for everything, is finding like what works for you, not just doing what everyone else does as well. So yeah, key things, giving yourself enough time to prepare. So ideally kind of looking for races 6 to 12 months out at least, doing your research to find the type of race that you want to do, and following a training plan. So then the nitty gritty, and again, I think Sam and David are going to talk a little bit more about this as well, but the terrain and elevation. So with ultra races, they can vary massively. So no 50Ks are the same. You could get a 50K that is on a flat kind of trail path, like for example, the Thames Path. They're the Thames Path 100 miler a couple of weekends ago. That's very flat. It's on gravel, it's nice and easy, but then you could get a 50K that's in the mountains, that is thousands of feet of elevation, or lots of like hilly races. You could have one that's mainly trail, you could have one that's on road. So again, this goes back to the previous point of doing your research, looking into what kind of race it is. So if you've never had any experience in the mountains before, and then you sign up for a 100K mountain race, then you're going to need to get into the mountains and train. Unfortunately, you won't just be able to go for runs around your local park and that will be sufficient. And that needs to be part of your training as well. So if you've got a race that there is a lot of elevation, you need to build that into your training as well. And it doesn't mean you need to go out and do hill sessions every single day, but especially when you're thinking about your long runs, going out and doing it on terrain and elevation that's similar to the race that you're undertaking. I mean, I say this as someone that did the HarrierJordan race in 2019, which is in a desert, and I don't think I did any training on the sand. So don't listen to me. Don't listen to my advice, but don't do what I did, because that was a bit of a shock. I think the first time I'd ever ran in gaiters and ran on sand dunes was actually during the race, but it was absolutely fine. But ideally, you do want to be training on similar terrain and elevation to what you're going to be racing in. Race nutrition as well. And again, I'm not going to go into detail about this because that's what we've got David for, but this is a really important part of your training as well. It's something that you need to be practicing almost as soon as you start going out for your training runs, especially your long runs. If you've been used to kind of half marathon or marathon training, then you might be used to taking on gels and that sort of thing. But for ultras, especially the longer distance, you're probably going to need to be looking to take real food on. So it's important that during those training runs, you find what works for you and like what food you want to take on, and also taking that on when you're running. So you think of your training runs as sort of dress rehearsals for the day. So you want to be practicing your race nutrition and also trying to get out on similar terrain and elevation. And then another important part, which I think some people don't always associate with ultra running, but is strength training. So strength and conditioning is really important, whether you're training for a 5K, a 10K, marathon, or an ultra marathon. Strength training can really help to reduce your risk of injury, which obviously you don't want if you're training for an ultra. And then it can also just generally funnily enough, make you a stronger, well-rounded runner. So if you are going for one of those races that has a lot of elevation and a lot of hill climbs, you'll really notice the difference if you've included strength training in your training, and you'll feel stronger on the climbs because you won't be running all of them. You will be hiking and doing a lot of walking, which is another great thing about ultras. You can walk and it's absolutely fine. It's basically, I've had friends describe it as a walking picnic. And also another great thing about ultras is no one ever really asks you what time you did. If you say to someone, oh, I ran a marathon, one of the first questions they say is, oh, what time did you do it in? If you tell someone you ran 100K or did a 100K race, they just look at you like you're crazy. So, but definitely getting your strength training in as well. So it can be easy to think, oh, I just need to run lots and lots to get ready for this ultra. And yes, you might need to run higher mileage than usual, but I would still dedicate at least one day a week to getting strength training in as well. And finally, the most important thing, and I think this is the same with any race distance you're trying to do, but just enjoy it. And especially if it's your first one, you're kind of going into that unknown. So you don't have the kind of pressure of aiming for a certain time. Like I just mentioned as well, lots of people in ultras, even sort of the elites and the super quick guys, will walk parts of it. They'll walk parts if there's like crazy elevation or when they're walking to take food on as well. But I think picking and all of these things that you can do can make sure that you enjoy it properly. If you pick the right race, if you train properly, if you nail your nutrition as well, it's just going to make the whole experience a lot more enjoyable. And then once you've ticked that first one off and then hopefully enjoyed it, I'm sure you'll be signing up for lots more and lots of crazier races in the future. But yeah, that's my overview of how to train for your first ultra.
That's great. Thanks, Jordan. And if people want to, we've got questions in the chat, in the Q&A section that we'll answer at the end. But if people want to actually reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, so you can reach out to me on Instagram. So my personal Instagram is just my name, Jordan Foster, or through Coopah Running as well. So that's just at Coopah Run. Oh, I've forgotten what the Instagram is. That's bad, isn't it? Okay, I think it's at Coopah Run Coach. But yeah, you can find me on Instagram.
Yeah, and I love the idea of if people aren't sure which races to get involved in, to go and volunteer, because it's such a good insight into running. And as you say, think about the terrain as well, because instead of thinking about miles with shorter distance races, you're thinking more about time, and actually terrain and elevation, all those things come into play with that. Well, thanks for that, Jordan. So we're now more talking about the distances. Sam, who we both spent nights cuddled together in the Sahara many years ago, he's here to explain about how to decide which races are right for you and what the differences are in multi-day and distances and all those things. So over to you, Sam.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I'm going to need to put that Nights in the Sahara in a bit of context in a second. First, I should probably give Jordan the credit she deserves. The race that she turned up to, having not trained on the sand or worn gaiters, she actually won by quite some time, and I think still holds the record. So yeah, unbelievable. Yeah, so evening, everyone. Really good to be here. Just by the fact that you're on this webinar, I'm guessing that you're thinking about putting, having a dabble into the world of ultra running. And so if that's true, congratulations, that's amazing. It was a slippery slope, and I kind of unintentionally signed down for an event, which is actually where I first met David. And I've never really looked back. It's a journey which is much more than just running. It's experience. You learn so much through doing these events. So I'm a massive advocate of them. I am one of the co-founders of Ultra X. We have 13 locations globally, and we essentially aim to make ultra running more accessible at a very basic level. We do multi-stage events mainly, but essentially we encourage people to take on challenges which might scare them a little bit. And as David's alluded to a little bit, my first race was in the Sahara, which was the Marathon des Sables about six years ago now. God, it feels like a long time. 7, 9? No, it wasn't. 16. It was 8 years ago. where I met David, and it was really supposed to be, you know, tick it off the list, move on, itch that scratch, and I had such an amazing experience, and that was really the reason why we set up Ultra X, was because we really wanted to encourage more and more people to take on these challenges, to understand why they should do them, and to help them make that first step, because it is really difficult. So I'm going to do my best this evening to kind of, I guess, give you a few considerations about things to think about when you're thinking about doing your first ultra, because it can be a bit of a minefield. And I really want to caveat this and kind of, I guess, everything which is said tonight with that. Ultra running is a really broad church, and there's no one size fits all approach. And one of the fun, but also, I guess, challenging things about it is that you do slightly have to work out what works for you. And so I think it's really important, and I think that's one of the reasons why people love the distances so much, is that you do work it out on the way, and that's why it's so rewarding. So as I say, I'm really focusing on considerations for someone that might be thinking about their first event, because, you know, I reckon once a week I have to explain to someone what an ultramarathon is, and it's incredibly confusing, because, you know, it starts officially at a marathon distance, so anything upwards from 26.2k, 26.2 miles, but then that goes to, you know, 100 miles, 200 miles. There's really crazy things. So the term ultra can be incredibly kind of misleading and confusing, and I just think from a beginner's perspective, it's important to kind of consider that and understand what different things are out there. So I don't have slides, but I have an acronym which I've created for the purpose of this evening, which is going to give you 5 things to consider about for your first ultramarathon. And 3 of these are practical, so things I think important. Some of these might be more obvious, and 2 are emotional, which I think are probably less obvious, but in my view, equally important, particularly as you kind of start to build up to the event and when you decide it. So the acronym is SPARK. And we're going to work in reverse, because that's the way it works, and it was the only word I could come up with which kind of worked, so I hope you bear with me. So number 1 is the K, starting from the end, which is know your options, and there are a ton. You've got distance, which is obviously the one which I think most people are drawn to when it comes to ultras, which is anything from 26.2 up to, as I say, 100, 200, 500, 1,000. But the thing is, it's very easy to be overly focused on distance, and there's probably 2 other kind of areas which are actually equally, and if not more important, and that is format and terrain. So the format is how the event works. There are single stage ultras, which are, I guess, the more traditional, similar to a park run or a London marathon, which are, you know, you start, you run, and then you finish. There are also multiple stage events, which is what Ultra X typically organise, where there might be a series of ultra marathons in between. There might be a campsite, something else, and there's also events like the events where you're going kind of unlimited, doing loops and things like that, which again, slightly different challenges. And to be honest, there's so many different slight tweaks that seem to be popping up every couple of months, that it's kind of important to kind of consider. And then there's terrain, which, as Jordan kind of alluded to a little bit, the difference in the terrain is probably the most important thing to consider in an ultra, because ultras are typically on trail for the most part. The surface can hugely vary, and that will, as a result, affect the way you train, the way you prepare, and importantly, if you're considering your first event, how long it's going to take you, because a 50k on road might take somewhere between the fastest in the world 3 hours, the slowest, you know, maybe 12, 14, 15. On mountain, you know, you could be doubling that. So it's really a very different style of event. And so I think all of these things are really important to kind of be aware of and consider when you're looking at that first distance and making that jump. And I think the other thing I'd say is that we like to focus on distances, and we like to, I think, assume that the more distance, the more difficult. And I think that's one of the reasons that ultras are really intimidating for the first part. We're used to seeing people, you know, run London Marathon and run Park Run, and we suddenly hear a distance like 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers or 100 miles, and the idea of running that distance is just unfathomable. But the truth is that the longer the distance is, the more the intensity drops. And so actually, in some ways, the longer events get slightly easier, or the training changes slightly, because you're not actually doing that super high intensity stuff. And I think one of the really, what I think is makes that slightly more accessible is that, as Jordan kind of alluded to, you know, you go into the office on a Monday morning after a marathon, someone's going to say, hey, David, how long did that take you? Whereas when you do your ultra, regardless of the length of it, you know, you could say 5 hours, you could say 500 hours, and generally the reaction is going to be pretty similar. So really, really kind of important to think about. And then I guess the final point I'd say on my first point, which is know your options, is that every race is unique. You know, Jordan mentioned it a minute ago as well, and that's one of the reasons I really love it. You know, you choose a marathon, and 90% of the marathons across the world, you're going to have, you could almost follow exactly the same training plan. Every ultra I've done, and I've done a few, I've needed to have a different approach because of the terrain, because of the distance, because of the climate. So really thinking about those things and how that might affect your training, how that might, you know, what appeals to you, that kind of thing, is really important. And yeah, I guess as a little example, we have full distance events, which are 5 stages over 220k, and 110 events, which are weekend, 110 kilometers, 2 days. We have 2 events in November. One is in Madeira, one is in Morocco. The average time it takes someone to finish UltraX Morocco is 16 hours. The average time it takes someone to finish Madeira is 26 hours. Same distance, same branding, similar information, etc. Obviously, the cutoff times are longer, but just really important to kind of consider this kind of stuff at the outset, because there actually are really significant differences between, you know, distances which may look similar. So that's number one. That's your K. Know your options. Number 2, slightly tenuous again, is reverse engineer your plan. Something Jordan kind of mentioned a little bit is it's really important to start with the end in mind and work backwards and work out if that's going to be achievable for you. So yeah, working out key milestones in your training. If you've got your event, you know, 16, 18 weeks in the future, working backwards, working out, okay, this is where I want to be 4 weeks out, this is where I want to be 8 weeks out, and then work out where you are now. And I think the really important thing to note is that you've got to start with where you are now. You know, I think it's I see a lot of people pick an event, you know, 20 weeks in advance, and they're like, great, fine. They work back 4 weeks. They say, okay, I want to be doing 40k then. And they work by 8 weeks. So I want to be doing 30k then. And then they're suddenly, you know, in 4 weeks from now, and they need to be doing 25k, and they're running once a week and doing 5k. So you've kind of got to work out where you are currently, where you need to get to, and break it down into small chunks. And it will be achievable, but really working that out from an early day and giving yourself enough time, because, you know, otherwise you're gonna be tight for training, and it could be a challenge. So number 3 is your A, and this is acknowledge it's not just physical. When I talk about training for these events, I actually try not to say train. I try to say preparation. And you know, we've got 4 people on this panel talking about 4 different subjects, and the reason for that is, you know, each of them is really important. And I think from people that are typically running shorter distances, they're focused on the training element big time. You know, you've got your training plan, you've got your runs each week, maybe 3, maybe 5, whatever. But actually, when you go a bit longer, nutrition, strength training, kit, and just general kind of logistics become really, really important. And getting those right makes life so much easier. So you know, Jordan mentioned a couple of things, but some of these ultras are really remote. How do you get there? Are you allowed a pacer? Are you allowed a support crew? You know, what kit do you need? Most ultras will have a long mandatory kit list, and you know, specific things which you may not have. And I know Kate's going to talk about that in a minute. So yeah, number 3, acknowledge it's not physical. And for our final 2 points, we're moving on to the kind of emotional side. So we're on to the kind of beginning of Spark. And first one I've got is ponder your why. Ponder's again quite tenuous, but ponder your why. Ask yourself why you are doing this. There's a lot of like fluff around a lot of these events now, and every event director in the country is going to want to tell you that you need to do their event. And there's lots of advertising and stuff out there, and there's people who will pressurize you into doing certain things, but you need to work out why it is you want to do this, because you're the one that's going to need to be training. You're the one that's going to turn up on that start line. You're the one that's going to get 2/3 of the way through and question what you're doing there. And I'm a classic example of someone that has signed down for events because they've been bucket listers, and I've qualified for them for whatever reason, and I've said, oh, I've now qualified, I've got to go and do that. And I've got there and I've been like, I'm not that excited about being here. I really like that. There's no reason. And I think that's when it becomes challenging. So I think really think about why you're doing this, and you know, what you want to get out of it. And then my final one, slightly following on from that, which is the S, is select something that excites you and scares you. So excite, as kind of tying into the last one, you want to do something which you're really, you know, you're going to get motivated about. You want to do something which is going to get you out of the bed in the morning to train. You want to do something which you get 2/3 of the way through, and when you're, you know, not sure if you're going to make it, you just really want to get to that finish line. And then I think the scare piece, because actually, you know, we want to challenge ourselves. That's kind of why we're here. And having that little bit of, oh, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen, is actually really important. So yeah, those are my 5 points. Spark in reverse. Select something that excites and scares you. Ponder your why. Acknowledge it's just not just physical. Reverse engineer your plan, and know your options. And as I say, yeah, we've got some time for questions at the end. So if you've got any thoughts, but yeah, hopefully that's helpful. And yeah, really encourage you to have a think, but do feel that you can achieve these kind of things. And yeah, you really won't look back if you do.
Amazing, thanks, Sam. And yeah, I completely agree that one size doesn't fit all. Longer doesn't mean harder, and that excitement and fear part, often they go hand in hand. But you need those because, as you said, there's sports speakers here, there's so much to take on board and so much time you need to give to training. You're only going to do that if you're genuinely excited or you're absolutely bricking yourself about it. So it doesn't have to be both, but it's useful to get one. Now, I've got some slides to cover with, they're quite long. There's lots of slides, but I wanted to fire through them to try and get everything, basically about 15 years of experience into 10 minutes. So if you don't know who I am, I'm David, and in addition to being founder of Caffeine, I've run quite a few races. I present and commentate the Golden Trail series on Eurosport, and I have podcasts where I happen to interview most of the best ultra runners and also nutritionists in the world. So these slides are a combination of my experience, but also the experience of people I've interviewed and been lucky enough to be friends with more than anything. So the first one is, don't shit yourself. We all know this is an issue, and let's get this out of the way. It doesn't have to be. Take Imodium. Most people don't for some reason. Whenever I race any big race, I have an Imodium tablet the night before. I have an Imodium tablet the morning of. There is no downside to having Imodium, other than you steady your stomach and you get rid of that fear factor. It's also great before Glastonbury as well. You don't have to get to those horrible toilets too much. Now, next one. This is a typical aid station we'll see in an ultra run, and as you can see, it's like a picnic or like a buffet, and it's quite tempting to just jump into all these foods. it's worth checking in advance what the nutrition on offer is for each race. Now you look at these foods and you think these are surely what are right for me when I race, but actually the reality of a lot of race organisers is they go down to Costco and they bulk buy a whole load of crap. Some of it is good for you, some of it isn't. And just because it's there doesn't mean it's right for you. But the thing to take from this picture is that unlike in marathons at shorter distances, this is more likely to be real food because it's because of the intensity in which you're running. The way you know partly what your mix of nutrition should be is based on your intensity. This is Zach Bitter. He was the 100-mile world record holder. This is Hayden Hawks, who's recently broke the record for Black Canyon. Now, I spoke to Zach about 6 weeks ago. When he broke the 100-mile world record, he only consumed enough carbohydrates to be taking on board 40 grams of carbohydrates per hour. If you don't know what the normal amount is, most marathon runners look to get between 60 milligrams, so it's 60 grams, and maybe up to 90 grams if you're someone like a Kipchoge and you're using a dual track nutrition absorption. But Hayden Hawks, who was running 100K, he actually took on over 100 grams of carbohydrates an hour. So these are both ultra runners, and the difference between the two is the intensity. Black Canyon is incredibly hilly, whereas Zach was doing a completely flat 100-miler. And so the difference between those two is that the less intense your running is, the less your muscles need constant blood flow. And that allows your body to have more blood flow to your stomach, which allows you to absorb more complex carbs. And so when you start to think about what type of food or nutrition should I be using, think about how intense you actually suspect you'll be throughout that race. And typically people start with more dense food. So you'd be having things like flapjacks, which are your low GI carbohydrates. And then you'd move to things like gels and energy chews later on in the race when your stomach is starting to fail potentially, or your muscles are really fatigued and you don't get the blood flow to your stomach. So start off with more traditional food and have the backup to move to faster burning nutrition later. Practice as well. A lot of runners know about practicing for things like marathons, and that normally for them means they go out on a long run, they'll try a gel once or they'll try a gel twice. Whereas actually for ultras, it's very different because you need your body to be constantly fueling and to be constantly moving that food out of your stomach. So, for example, the Golden Trail World Series, one of the finalists there, in fact, the winner of the final, she can't take nutrition before she races or during races. So my advice to her was actually to go out and once you've had a very big meal, to go for a jog immediately afterwards. And if you have stomach issues yourself, this is something I'd recommend. On your longer runs, run to see a friend, run to a pub, run to a lovely lunch, break your run in half, have the massive slab of food, and then carry on running afterwards. It gets your body used to absorbing those nutrients while you're exercising. So practice not just to see if you like a food, but actually having a large amount of food over a long extended period while you run. Next up, there's a picture of me when I was younger. Very different to now, obviously. But food is not just about your muscles, it's also about your brain. So when you're in these longer races, one of the potential issues is that you get flavor burn. You're sick of eating the same thing, but also that you just find it hard to take on fuel because you're less excited by it and you struggle to actually eat it. So one of the things we recommend is not only varying the type of foods that you have so that you have different flavors coming at you always, so you don't get bored of them, but also that you think about how you're going to be emotionally throughout the course of a race. And so it could be that you love a certain chocolate bar, or that there's something that reminds you of a friend, a certain sweet. Use the power of that positive thought and have that held back so that you know when you're getting towards the end of your race, it's something you're really going to look forward to. It's going to not only encourage you to carry on running, but it's going to fill you with such positivity that when you get it, you're going to wolf it down and it's going to reinforce that positive emotion. So think about nutrition, not just for your body, but also for your brain. Now, Caffeine is obviously something else that we believe in massively, is that caffeine, but it benefits 93% of us based on our DNA. Sadly, 7% of people get no response at all and should not use caffeine. It will slow them down. But 93% of us actually benefit from it. How caffeine helps, it's, I didn't know these were clickable ones, that's great. It increases alertness and reduces mental fatigue. It reduces the perception of pain and fatigue, so you can actually run harder for longer without feeling as bad. And it releases fat cells from the liver into your bloodstream that can be used as a fuel source, which reduces the use of glycogen for your muscles, which then extends the amount of energy you put in your body. So all of these improve performance. Something else, and what that then equates to is up to 6% increase in endurance for people who use caffeine. Muscular strength is useful. This is a slide from somewhere else. So repeat sprintability, probably not as important in ultras. How much should you take? Optimal caffeine dose has been shown in over 50 studies to be between 3 and 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilo. That is a massive amount of caffeine. That equates to, for most females, I can't see that by my slide, most males between 250 to 500 milligrams of caffeine. A massive amount. If you think about products out there, compare these two, you've got your 250 to 500 milligrams of caffeine versus 77 for a Red Bull. So it's important that when you're using caffeine, you decide what source of caffeine will actually help you get to a substantial kick. And this is when to take caffeine. You can see caffeine typically starts to peak between 45 and an hour after you've taken it and lasts for about an hour. So actually, if we're thinking about an ultra race, ultra runs are so long that if we're using caffeine during our performance, then taking caffeine once isn't actually going to get us that far in the race, which is why we recommend you actually break down that amount from before and split it. Unfortunately, there's no, and I'll come back to that one, there are no scientific studies on multiple doses of caffeine, but my experience has been when I was racing comrades in South Africa, I was 92K, took about 7 hours for myself. If you start with a low amount of caffeine and always increase the dosage, you can then extend this curve. And the rule is, as long as you're always increasing the total amount in your system, we found that you can then have that caffeine kick extended for longer. And so not only should you think about the type of caffeine you're using. So when I did comrades, I took on a small amount of caffeine, then increased it slightly, then increased it slightly more, so that I was always taking that step change. But also think about how you're taking your caffeine, because if you take a caffeine gel, it takes up to 55 minutes for it to peak in your blood. Whereas if you're taking something like Revis or caffeine bullet, where it's absorbed in your mouth, it starts to peak at high doses in only 15 minutes. And so depending on the source of caffeine you have really changes your caffeine strategy for a race, because instead of having to take something in advance, you can be more reactive. That's me done. It's fairly caffeine heavy there, but I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions at the end about nutrition as well. So get them in the Q&A section and we will answer them then. Now, next up is Kate. And if you don't know Kate's background, not only is she one of the few of us who's lucky enough to be a fell runner, a proper fell runner, but she's massively transformed the affordability and the quality of trail running equipment with Harrier. So Kate, take it away.
Thank you so much, David. Hi, everybody, and really appreciate being part of this fantastic webinar. So I'm just going to share my screen now because I have got a couple of slides to show everybody. And so here we go. So my name is Kate Parker. And hang on 1 second. Ah, it's here. Can everybody see that? Right, let me just check. So sorry, can I just check people can see that? I can't see you anymore, David. See if people can see it.
Yeah, that is great, Kate. Full screen. Beautiful.
Fantastic. Thank you. So my name's Kate Parker, started Harrier Trail Running about 3 years ago, and our ethos is all about trail running for everybody. And ultra running is something that we're really passionate about, helping to complete these long distance events, whether it's a race or just your own sort of day out to wanting to do something that's a challenge. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about kit, because if you've been through all of the training and the preparation and everything with your nutrition and your training plans, the last thing that you want is for your kit choice to let you down at last minute and for something that's in your control to affect how things go on race day. So the thing that I would say is the biggest factor in relation to kit is comfort. And there's so much that people talk about in relation to gram saving, weight saving and gram counting around kit. But I would say that comfort is the most important thing, because during an ultra, you are going to feel uncomfortable mentally and physically, emotionally at different points of the ultra. And the last thing that you want is for uncomfortable kit to be added to that when it doesn't have to. So definitely go for things that are going to make you more comfortable, that are more practical. It's not always about the weight saving. One of the things that is the biggest factor in relation to comfort on your runs is your hydration vest. So you can see the girls here wearing their hydration vests. And if you don't choose the right size, if they're too big, it can cause a lot of chafing and a lot of rubs around your collarbones. I see a lot of people, especially in summer ultras, if they're wearing the wrong size vest and it's too big for them, then it gives them really bad chafing around their shoulder and their collarbone areas. If your race vest is too small, then it means that it could rub underneath your arms, but it also might stop you from putting in the right amount of kit that you really want to use on the day. So when you try on a hydration pack or a race vest, make sure that you try it on at home and you put some of the kit in that you're going to be wearing on the day. So stuff a waterproof in the back, put your soft bottles in the front, pack it out a little bit, because just trying it on empty is going to feel a lot different when it's loaded up with several kilograms of kit, and it makes a massive difference. So make sure that it's the right size. You don't want it too big, you don't want it too tight, you want it just right with your average amount of kit in there. So that would be one of the biggest things. And the next thing for comfort is obviously your feet, because we all spend so much money on fancy trainers, fancy trail running shoes, but if you don't have really good socks to go with your shoes, and you need that balance between the breathability when your feet are too hot, and then you need them to be able to keep warm as well during cold weather. I used to wear sort of basic cotton socks, but I've found that it does make a massive difference to treat yourselves to a proper pair of socks that are built for running with the correct yarn and the tech properties to allow that different temperature regulation and prevention of blisters and things, because your feet are going to, if they are uncomfortable, they're going to be a real distraction on the day. And it may be that you've done all that training and a tiny blister or something on your foot is preventing you from doing your best. So make sure that your hydration pack and your feet are super comfortable. The next thing that's really important, especially for being in the UK, is kit layering for the weather. So as we all know, we never know what the weather's going to be like. We don't know if it's going to be boiling hot in April, or it's going to be freezing cold, or rain showers in late August. So keep an eye on the weather in the week up to your run, and have some if-then strategies, which are really important to know. If it's going to be raining, I'm going to be taking this kit. If it's going to be really hot, I'm going to have this kit, because you're going to need different things on really hot days compared to if it's drizzly, overcast, or giving out showers. And you need to have that list down in front of you so that when you're getting nervous the evening before, you don't forget your cap, you don't forget your sun cream, those sorts of things when it's hot. And when it's wet weather or it's showery weather, you know that you're going to have things like your waterproof at the top of your pack, so you're not putting your waterproof on, getting hit by a shower and being really damp and uncomfortable for the rest of the race, because it may feel like a bit of a pain putting on your waterproof that takes, a minute. It might feel like a long time during the race, but it's a long time to be soggy and feeling horrible in all this wet kit if you don't put it on and you get a shower. So make sure you've got some really good layering. If you are wearing a waterproof, I'd really recommend wearing a nice thin long sleeve top underneath it, because that will really help with breathability and comfort of the waterproof. Sometimes if you wear a waterproof jacket with a short sleeve t-shirt, it can feel quite clammy on the inside, on your arms, and it's not very nice at all. But if you've got that thin layer on underneath, it'll still be breathable. If you've got a good quality waterproof jacket, look at the breathability rating as well as the waterproof rating. They should both be at least 15,000 for a decent jacket. So our jacket's 15,000, up to 20,000. Make sure that you've got that, because it's as much important for them to be breathable as it is waterproof. So it keeps you nice and comfortable. So next, to pack as well, practically. So we touched on this a little bit with what compartments to put which things in. So when you're getting ready for your ultra or on your training runs, try to get into a habit of everything having its own position in your race vest. So for example, I know it sounds really obvious, but the things that you're going to need regularly, like your nutrition, your hydration, have those in your prime locations in your race vest. So make sure that it's up front in the sides of your race vest, because if you've got your fuel and your calories in your back compartment, chances are you're not going to reach for it as often. And that means that you're going to get fatigued, you won't drink enough, and then you're going to get a lot tired quicker. But you can save the back compartment for things that maybe you won't intend on using. So hopefully things like your emergency kit, like your first aid kit and your emergency bivy bag, save those for your big compartment in the back, and have the prime spot for everything at the front, including your phone, so that you can get lots of pictures whilst you're on there. I always try to think of the pack a little bit like Goldilocks. So I guess we've all got that friend that turns up with absolutely everything, including the kitchen sink, and they've got this massive bag with loads of things clanking around. They don't use half of it. They don't even know half the stuff that's in their pack. It's just in there. So try to be quite strategic. If you've got your plan for what type of weather it is, you've got your kit list of what you need for that particular run or that race, stick to that. So you haven't got too much, too little. It's Goldilocks. It's just the right amount. But what I would say is don't skimp on your safety items at all. Never try to weight save when it comes down to things that are there to be keeping you safe or keeping you comfortable, because it just doesn't add up if something goes wrong. And with trail running, you do need to make sure that you're looking after yourself and you're totally reliable on yourself as well. One tip that I'd say with choosing your race vest, that's maybe something people don't think about, is to not think about the capacity in terms of your race, but think about the capacity that you'll need on your longest training run before you start tapering. If you choose a race vest for your longest training run, that's got to include a lot more water and snacks, because you're not going to have aid stations, not going to have any help, and you're going to have to carry a lot more for that long training run before you start tapering. So always try to go for one a little bit bigger, future-proof yourself, and then you've got one if, say, you wanted to move on to doing a bit of a more technical, a longer race later on, and you're not having to buy more kit. You've got one race vest that will be with you for years to come. So there's a few different strategies that you can use with hydration. And I always like to use a bit of a combination between soft bottles and water bladder. So your soft bottles are there to be squishy, so that you're not carrying a hard flask, which is going to have a really annoying sloshing noise when you're running. That's why they're squishy, because they vacuum down when you drink water out of them. And if you get different colours, you can mix and match the colours to, say, having a yellow flask and have your energy or your electrolytes in there. And then you can have a blue one for plain water. So when you're totally knackered and you're not sure what's going on, you just know which is which, and you can split up plain water and your energy quite nicely during the race. Having a water bladder as well is a really good idea, because it allows you to balance the weight around your body. So here you can see Michael setting up his water bladder. I always really like to have this U shape for my water bladder, just on the right of the screen. So it comes down over your shoulder, through the little elastic toggles, back up, and then it sits really nicely just where your mouth is, rather than it coming out the bottom of the race vest and sort of flapping around and hitting you in the face, which can get quite irritating. The other thing that's quite annoying with water bladders is they can make a really loud sloshing noise when you're with people, so people can hear you coming all the time. So when you're filling up your water bladder, shut it off so that the lid's on it, tip it up so that the water bubble floats up to where the tube connects to the bag, so you're essentially turning it upside down, and then you can suck the air bubble out of the tube, close off the valve, and it makes a vacuum. And then you won't have a sloshing bladder whilst you're running. Honestly, it's brilliant. It's like a complete game changer as soon as that stops happening. So that is some different ways of hydration. But if you use a water bladder, be really careful that you don't run out of liquid between checkpoints. Never skip a fill up between checkpoints, because I've done this. I was in such a rush to go through a checkpoint. I thought I'll be fine. I've got a litre of water left. You know, it's 10 miles to the next checkpoint. And you drink so much more in the second half of an ultra, especially if it's just a warm day. And I ran out of water, and it was really unpleasant because I couldn't feel how much was left in the water bladder on my back, and I'd skipped the checkpoint. So make sure that you carry more water than you think. If it's a warm day, carry even more. You can always tip it out when you're halfway to a checkpoint because you feel like you've got too much and you want to drop a bit of weight, but don't scrimp on having water when you're out on the trails, because it's really unpleasant if you run out. So from hydration, go on to safety. Don't be the person who doesn't turn up with any safety kit and then falls over and doesn't have their stuff. It's so important to be self-sufficient and have things like your emergency sleeping bag, first aid kit, dry bags, keeping everything nice and dry. I see a lot of racers that promote having foil blankets. I would say in trail running, a foil blanket just is not good enough at all. You need to have an emergency bivvy. And if you ever have to use it, a really good tip is to get into the bag with your race vest underneath your bum, so you're off the floor. So you sit on top of your race vest inside the bag, and then you can put the bag over your head like a bit of a hood, and then get really cozy inside. Even if it's a warm day, if you've had an accident, you get cold and go into shock very quickly. So it's really important to just have an emergency bivvy in your bag, drop it in the bottom, forget about it. And then if somebody else has an accident, then you can be the smug person to help them because you've brought all the kit, and it's just nice to have it. If you've got a little first aid kit, you can always tailor it to what you need. So if you wanted any sort of extras in there, like some scissors or some paracetamols, make sure that the first aid kit that you're carrying is relevant for what you need. If you want some extra blister plasters for your feet, ladies, if you need anything for like feminine hygiene and things, make sure that you've got all of that in there, and it makes you feel really confident on race day that you're covered with everything. Dry bags are amazing for compartmentalizing your kit. So if you get a couple of dry bags, it means that when you have to stop and get something out of the back of your pack, you don't have to tip all of your stuff on the ground trying to find your car keys, because you can just pull out different bags. Everything's nice and neat, color coordinated. It's very satisfying to have your kit all nice and neat inside your pack, and you can squish it down and squish out all the air so that you can fit more in as well. So I definitely say dry bags are a nice addition to any kit. So one of the final things, and my favorite piece of kit, is poles. And I saw on the questions, a couple of people talked about walking. Poles are just such a great addition to any kit for ultra running, because you can use them for all different reasons. And I've used them for lots of different reasons in different ultras. So you can use them for efficiency, for getting that competitive edge if you're really going for it. We've seen all the top athletes in Europe, they all use them for competitive edges, and we're just starting to catch up with people using poles now for their advantage. They're also really great for preventing injury. So I see a lot of people using them if they've got an injury, or say they're coming back from an illness, or they're not totally confident. It's like having two pairs of legs. They're really great for giving you confidence, say if you're coming back from illness or an injury. But even better, they reduce impact on your knees and your ankles and also your hips by about 40%. So if you can imagine having a whole day out in the hills, the uphills and the downhills, the kind of impact that that puts on your knees. If you have a strategy with when you'd like to use poles, get to grips with them first, it can make such a massive difference. And you might even be able to walk down the stairs the next day, which is always a bonus and nobody can ever do after an ultra, but it will certainly be a lot less painful if you've used poles from the start. So that is me. I'm just going to stop sharing now. And I was really keen to just show you something that we've got from Harrier, which people might like. Won't be a second. Right, am I back? So we've got our How to Run an Ultra guide. It's a book that we've got on the website with all sorts of things like checklists and what if then strategies. And like Sam was saying, a lot of it is on the emotional and mental side as well. But we've also got it as a free digital download. So if people would like it to get prepping for their ultra, then it's a nice resource for anybody to have a look at.
That's very cool. Yeah, get on the website, guys. Well, we've thanks for that, Kate. We've got 44 questions. I'm not quite sure what the best way to divide and conquer these are, because some of them are quite specific, and some of them are more general. So shall I quickly read them out, and then anyone who wants to put their hand up to answer can do that. So the first one's about from Ellen. It's to do with, she's doing a second 50k at UltraX Finland, and was wondering what do you need to consider in training to start taking on multi-day events. Do you want to take that one, Jordan?
Shall I take that one, or Sam, do you want to take that one?
Why don't you go and then I'll go.
Okay, well, I'll give some advice, and then obviously Sam's the expert on multi-day. But again, I think a lot of people get very scared about multi-day, thinking, oh my God, how am I going to train for all of that? And again, it's quite similar. So if I've got someone training for a multi-day event, the training isn't too dissimilar really from if you were training from a one-day ultra. I'd say the biggest thing that you want to get used to for multi-day events is doing back-to-back long runs, which can sound horrific. If you were going out for a 50k training run, for example, normally the next day you would have a rest day and you'd put your feet up all day, probably get a takeaway and not do a lot. Whereas if you're training for a multi-day event, you need to get your body used to running on tired legs. So I think there was another question in there about splitting up your long runs over the day or over 2 days. And again, that's a great way to train for an ultra. And again, like most of us that are doing these races have full-time jobs, have other commitments. We're not full-time athletes that can just commit all of our time to running. So splitting up those runs is just as beneficial. And again, it gets you used to training on tired legs. So if you are thinking about doing an ultra but worried about the time commitments or a multi-day, then don't worry and think, oh, I've got to go out for 6 hours every single day. If you can only fit in a 3-hour run one day and then a 2-hour run the next day, then that's fine. Like it's just about getting your body prepared to running on tired legs. But also what I will say from experience, and I've only done one multi-stage, so obviously Sam and David are a lot more experienced with me, but what I found weirdly was as the week went on, I actually felt better. I'd say the hardest day of HarrierJordan was the second day, because I think I'd done the day one. So my body was like, oh, cool, we've done that. We get to rest now. Got up and ran the next day. And it was like, okay, what are we doing? But then by day 3 and 4, it was like, okay, yeah, we're getting up to run again. And I actually think day 4 was my like strongest running day. I felt really good. So don't underestimate like how amazing our bodies actually are as well and how they adapt. And it is possible because thousands and thousands of people complete UltraX races every single year that probably had that same question that, oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do a multi-stage, but then they go and do it. So yeah, it's just about being sensible with your training. And yeah, I'd say the most important thing is getting used to training on tired legs.
And if you don't have time to do long back-to-backs, you can do something like a weights session on the Saturday you'll get tired muscles from that, and that replicates the back-to-back. But ideally, if you do something like a Saturday night, Sunday morning, you're really then reducing down the time in between. So actually then the distance on the Saturday is not quite as important. We've got a question from Lisa about finding it hard to fit in strength training for 60K while she's running 4 times a week. It is tough. I'd recommend if people are struggling with that, you always got to have a break between your hard days unless you're going for these back-to-back. So if I was trying to squeeze in strength training, I'd probably do a morning run, and then that same day try and do some weights that evening, so you've still got the whole of the next day to try and recover. Then we have a question for change or injury. How do you build back up if you've had to reduce volume? That's from Christine. And how close is too close to the rate to be hitting your peak weeks? Anyone want to take this one? Or
training through injury, how do we build back up? So again, it's just about being sensible. So not if you're coming back from an injury, and again, talking from personal experience now, I'm just coming back from an injury as well. It's not throwing yourself back in. So say, for example, if you're following a 16-week training plan and you missed the middle 6 weeks, you might then just need to take a little bit of a step back, do a couple of easier weeks again to build yourself back up and get back up to that peak mileage, not miss 6 weeks and then go straight into a big week and run 5 times a week and do your longest run. And in terms of peak weeks, kind of ideally, like for an ultra, I'd say similar to a marathon, you want to start tapering off about 3 weeks before. So when we say taper, that means starting to lower the intensity and the volume of your training as you're leading into the race, so that you feel good on race day. So you want those peak weeks to be about 3-4 weeks before. But again, it depends on the type of event you're training for, the kind of length of the training plan you're doing as well, and ultimately like what your goal is. Like if you're using an ultra race as training for another race, for example, so it's very dependent on what your personal goal is. But yeah, I'd say the biggest thing with injury is just be sensible, include cross training as well. So getting on the bike, swimming, strength training, all of those things will help you. It's just about building up your endurance again. So
yeah, and if you're trying to catch up miles, one of the easiest ways to do it is to split your long sessions, or to split any sessions, because it gives your body the ability to adapt twice. And instead of going out where you're going to be completely depleting your muscles of glycogen and doing like a 2-hour session, if you were to do a 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the evening, then actually the stress on the body is reduced. And to think about not just your total mileage, but the intensity as well, because a 10-mile jog is not the same as a 10-mile race, the impact it has on you. So we've had a question: during a 100K race, what checkpoints should you take on calories on board, and best times to take on board calories? Do you want to say that on Sam, or should I jump in? Or?
Best time to take on calories, I'd say from the beginning is very important. I think even though you might not feel it 15 minutes in or 30 minutes in, taking on calories on board is really important, particularly for the longer races. I think something shorter where you're maybe out for 3, 4, 5 hours, you can kind of get away with it, and you might feel great for 5, 6 hours into an ultra. But if you're not fueling from the word go, it's going to be an issue. And I think I just emphasize a bit of what David said about practicing your nutrition, and the idea of going for a big meal and then eating. It sounds ridiculous, but training to consume food essentially on the run is something which you do need to train. It's not something our bodies are used to. It's a really weird thing to take on 60 grams of carbohydrate an hour. And so in the same way that you build up to an event by building distance, you should be considering about building up your food intake over time. So even if that is starting out with every time you go out for more than 60 minutes, having something, whether it's a cereal bar or a sorry malt loaf or whatever you fancy. And in some ways it might make your runs easier because it's something to look forward to, but building that in over time, trying to increase the amount of food over time, working out what works for you, and then going into a race with a bit of a strategy that you've practiced beforehand is super important.
Then there's quite a few questions about strength training, so I'm going to try and summarize them into one question to Jordan. But just to answer one, 2 sessions to gain, 1 to maintain. but realistically, most people aren't going to be able to do 2 sessions of strength training during ultra training because there's too much mileage. So actually getting one in is good. So Jordan, I guess the question would be.
No, I saw that question as well, and I think with that, it's just important to remember that something is better than nothing. So if you can do one, that's better than not doing any at all. So don't worry about like fitting loads and loads in. If you can only fit in one, then that's great.
And there's quite a few questions about what would you include as a strength workout?
Yeah, so I think, again, just like going back to the basics, and this is the same, I'd say, to anyone, whether they're running a 5K or a marathon, it doesn't need to be overcomplicated. Like, you really want to think of those like big compound movements. And when I say compound movements, it's like squats, deadlifts, glute bridges, like things that are working your legs primarily and making you a stronger runner. So if you've got stronger glutes, that's going to help you with running. And if you're a strong core as well. So I think sometimes I know people have said about fitting it in, but it doesn't mean you need to go to the gym and spend hours in the gym every week. There's lots of stuff you can do at home. So for example, like if you're waiting for the kettle to boil, stand there and do calf raises while you're waiting for the kettle to boil. When you're brushing your teeth, do a few squats. Like if you're on a meeting or on the phone or something, do some lunges or hold the plank. Strength training doesn't mean, oh, you need to go to the gym and smash out weights for 3 hours. There's a lot you can do with just body weight that will help you as well. Single leg exercises are really important as well, especially like if you're thinking about the more technical terrain and hill running. So like single leg deadlifts, single leg squats, and just really work, like focusing on that single leg stuff as well can really help.
Now we've got some questions about blisters, Kate. Do you wanna take this one just while you're unmuting? Some people have been asked about nutrition and liquid. I would break that down hour by hour. I know exactly what I'm doing for every hour of an ultra typically. And same with liquid. You drink to taste and how when you're thirsty, but actually practice in the hot days and replicate what you're needing when you're racing. Okay, tell us about blisters. I mean, this is a hard question, right?
Yeah, so I would just say, and there was also one about toenails. So I really hate seeing pictures of people's toenails falling off on Facebook feeds after an ultra, but it seems to be quite popular. But basically try to go for shoes that are going to allow your feet to swell during the ultra. So, you know, at least half a size, sometimes a size more. You can get socks that are double layer. So ours are double layer, which means that one side of the sock is moving against your shoe, whereas the other sock is staying against your foot. So that prevents the rubbing. So double layer socks, make sure your shoes are a little bit bigger size to allow for foot expansion, and cut your toenails, especially if you're running down hills, cut your toenails before you do any hilly ultras.
Yeah, absolutely. A few quick fire questions. Simon, should you train up a hill if you haven't got hills near you? Absolutely. I've done up and down one hill repeatedly before. Camille Heron's trained once a fortnight in one comrades, only doing hills once a fortnight by going to a place and just repeating them. Would you recommend paracetamol or ibuprofen before or during races? Jan, this is an important one because if you take the wrong one, you could die, genuinely. So you need to be careful about painkillers because depending on the painkiller you choose, it could actually give you issues with the liver, which is also intensified by heat exhaustion and general exhaustion. So I think paracetamol is a good one, but Google it because I can't remember the top of my head. Is that right, Samia? Paracetamol, yes. Ibuprofen, no. A few questions on caffeine. Caffeine, yeah, it does increase your heart rate. If you have a bad heart, you shouldn't be using caffeine. You can overdose on caffeine, absolutely. I wouldn't recommend people have more than 200 milligrams an hour, up to 400 milligrams a day typically, but it depends on what your tolerance is. And what other questions? If you can't take caffeine, then you can have a cigarette. That's a booster, but in general, it comes down to just get good on your carbohydrates. So any other questions people have seen they can jump in on? Mentally training for an ultra, you'd like to pick that one up?
Go on then. And I also saw one about heat training, which I'll touch on as well. I think mentally, I'd say two things is that you need to work out why you're doing it and you know, and have that memorized or write it down or whatever. You know, I sometimes find writing things down really helps, or trying to write things down really helps work it out and having that to go back to. And then I think there's, again, it's something that can be trained and improved on. And I think you build resilience and you build strength by training for these things, and you don't need to think of it, you know, no one is going to be able to run 100k, 100 miles, whatever tomorrow, but the fact that you can, firstly, you sign down to something like this, so you're obviously a mentally strong person, then you choose to train for this, and then over the course of your training you will hit and complete milestones, whether that's a, you know, a 20-mile long run or a 30-mile long run, and those things will build up and they will feed into your kind of mental strength. So even though it's not necessarily obviously mental training, I think those things can make a big difference. And then on the heat side, I just saw a comment on there. It's actually something, you know, we have several races in fairly extreme conditions, but it's not something I'd recommend even thinking about until you're fairly close to your event. You can get a lot of the benefits of heat acclimation very quickly, and then it kind of tails off. So most people, if you're doing, unless you're a really high level athlete, you can start considering your heat acclimation kind of 6, but more likely 4 weeks out from the event. So it kind of sinks in with your taper, which is actually quite nice because you're cooling down the mileage, and then you might bring in some heat work. And actually, at a very simple level, it's just about getting hot frequently. If you get hot frequently, your body will get used to the temperature. If you can raise your heart rate slightly when you're at those temperatures, it's also going to help. And actually, your body will become much more efficient in operating and working in temperatures. So ways to do that, I mean, you can go and do it in a heat chamber. That tends to be quite an expensive option, but that's probably your kind of A grade option. You go, there's various universities and gyms which offer that, where you go and run on a treadmill or go and cycle. But actually, I've never done that personally. Simple things like sitting in a really hot bath every day for half an hour, particularly after a training session when you come in, sitting in a sauna for long periods of time, or slightly increasing over time, make a really big difference. And then you can also just run with clothes, lots of clothes on, or put a bin bag over you, and all those things will help, definitely. And they can be quite easy wins when you're looking for those like 1-2% in the last few weeks before your race.
Yeah, and consider the whether it's wet or dry, because running in the desert is very different to somewhere humid. So that might be a sauna versus a jacuzzi. That might be like a woolly hat versus a bin bag. One makes you sweat, one makes you hot. Quick questions. Claire said she's too scared to do an ultra, but she's done over marathons. Marathons are mostly harder than ultras because you've got the pressure to run marathons is throughout, and in theory you should be able to push yourself to the end of a marathon. Ultras, you can walk, you can have snacks, there's all, you can chat to people. They're a lot easier, so just sign up. We've got a question about waterproof jackets. When you get one, that could be fastened over a hydration vest. It'd be a good question, actually. Kate, what do you recommend? Jackets over, under, or options, or?
Yeah, well, I'd be biased, but our jacket goes over, under, and around your waist, so you can have it 3 ways with our jacket. But have it changeable. So if it's going to be a showery day, have it where you can just pull it over your race pack to cover everything, make it all waterproof. If it's going to be raining for long periods of time, put it underneath your race vest so you can just forget about it. Put your kit in dry bags in your race vest, so that's all kept nice and dry.
Alan, you store your poles in your bag, so get the right pack so you can store your poles. Harry has some that you can slip them in easily. Peter, on your coffee, 3 to 4 cups a day. If they're strong cups, you might actually get withdrawal symptoms by reducing your caffeine. So it depends on how much you're taking. We've got a whole blog on it about when to cut down caffeine. And generally, it takes 3 to 4 to get it out of your system, but it takes about 2 weeks for your brain to adapt to the reduction in adenosine, and so the increase in adenosine. So it depends on quite how strong those coffees are. Then we've done ultra in a warm country. We've done poles. We've done tapering 2 to 3 weeks.
Sorry, I saw a question that I think might be quite useful. So someone's put in a question about what to do if you're on your periods during race day and how to do during training, which is obviously something that like females or people that have periods might have to deal with during races. And I've been there, and yeah, it's not the most enjoyable, but I'd say that again, training during it. So if you like track your periods or know that, oh, I'm actually going to be on my period for that race day, and even if you don't feel like it, get out for some training runs when you're on your period. So practice taking all your kit with you, like Kate said, having that all in your bag and just practicing what it feels like. I know that it can vary from person to person, but again, taking paracetamol, not ibuprofen, during the runs as well. So make sure that you've got, if you need to take painkillers, that you've got something that's actually safe to take. You might find as well that you need to up your hydration as well, because when you're on your period, you can get more dehydrated easier as well. And again, everyone is different. So again, there isn't like a one size fits all, but I would say that if you are training, you need to be training like around your cycle and make sure you know when the race is going to fall. There's lots of tracking apps available. Clue's a really good one for tracking your period. You can also do it on Garmin now as well. So you can track your cycle on Garmin. So then that you can see how that affects your training. One thing that I've noticed when I run when I'm on my period and race when I'm on my period is my heart rate is a lot higher as well. So that might be something to take into consideration, but it's all things. Basically, just don't let it be a surprise on race day. So it's like me and Sam spoke about earlier, it's kind of about planning ahead and planning backwards. So if you give yourself enough time and you can fit that into your training, but yeah.
And Rena McGregor's got some amazing content about it as well. She specialises in training during menstruation cycles and talks about how the different days affect different training sessions. So seek out her knowledge. Adam Miles, what are your go-to shoes for 100k plus ultra? That I'd say very much depends on the terrain, depends on how fast you're going to run it and the conditions as well. So 100k I'd be wearing racing shoes myself, but that's because I'm doing it quickly. Whereas other people might need more of support. So it really depends on factoring all of those in and what you think you're going to feel comfortable in the latter stage of that. Then we've done mental strategies. I'm flow during training, so that's something. I haven't realised what that means. Any suggestions to avoid nausea? I mean, that's a hard one because everyone gets nausea for different reasons. Sometimes it's for heat and not taking on electrolytes. Sometimes it's because you've taken on too much food. The main thing is just practicing nutrition over and over again and seeing what works for you. Again, Rena McGregor's done some excellent podcasts on those. We did them with Bad Boy Running. She's the GB 24-hour team specialist, and she talks about having options so that you may be nauseous even if you've never had been before. You might have your nutrition dialed, and then you're just sick in your next race. So actually having alternative strategies is equally as important, because it means that even if you are sick, you've got something that appeals to you. Any other questions that I can see? I think we're good on those. Yes, so I think any other questions, last questions from the audience? Well, in which case, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And thank you to Kate, Sam, and Jordan. I'm going to see if there's a way we can do the draw or not from Kate, because we're checking to see. Oh, we've got a thumbs up.
Yes. We can do the competition draw. So how we can do it is if I scroll up and down the list and Dave, or actually Jordan, maybe your little girl would like to shout stop, and then wherever my mouse is, then that's the winner. Oh, she's on mute.
Oh, got to unmute Jordan.
Okay. I'm going to get the participant list. So what's your little girl's name, Jordan? Gracie. Okay, so Gracie, whenever you want, I'm not going to look. You shout stop, and then I'm going to stop over somebody's name to win lots of prizes. Okay. You can do it anytime you want.
Yeah.
The winner is Jamie Donald.
Amazing. Congratulations, Jamie. You've got an absolute feast of prizes from our company. But everyone, thank you so much for coming. If you've got any questions, do feel free to reach us out to us individually. I would recommend wholeheartedly all the companies who are on this podcast. You know, they're not only great products and great organizations, but the people behind them are from the community and care about it as well. So, you know, show your appreciation with your cash, basically. So, thanks, guys. And anything else, our other speakers?
Thanks everyone, and sorry about our special guest, but she'll be doing ultras in a few years. I'm going to sign her up to an UltraX event when she's 18.
And if any of the participants have any requests from other topics they'd like us to cover in the future, you know, we've got a whole wealth of experience amongst our companies, and we're here to just help the community. So do get in touch if there's anything else you'd like help with. And thanks again for attending. We'll see you having been trained by Coopah wearing Harrier at an UltraX event in the future.
Thanks everybody. Bye.
Thanks everyone. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.